Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the session on ecological infrastructure, people and business, building a secure future together. I'm Michelle Audouin, and I'm the host of the session. I'm the Biodiversity Ecosystem Services Group in Smart Places of the CSIR. Today, we're going to discuss ecological infrastructure. Global trends such as climate change and rapid urbanization are degrading our natural resource base. If development is to be sustainable, it needs to be undertaken within the limits of the natural environment. In this session, our focus on ecological infrastructure is going to be on goods and services provided by the natural environment, particularly water. Other that are provided include aspects such as soil formation for agriculture and disaster risk reduction. We've invited representatives from both the private and the public sector to give us their views on ecological infrastructure, but mainly on how it's been managed and also some of the challenges. We're going to start with a video of a presentation that was put together by Ilse Gotzi. She's also a member of the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Group in Smart Places. Her research focuses on assessing ecosystem service condition and developing knowledge and management approaches for flood regulation services, flood hazards, and their impact on people and infrastructure to inform improved flood management. Her presentation today, though, is going to focus on ecological infrastructure in general and also on strategic water source areas. Thank you, Ilse.
Ecological infrastructure, people and business. Building water security is more than building infrastructure and managing demand. It requires recognition of the real value of ecological infrastructure for water security, protection and restoration of strategic water source areas, which will include clearing invasions, restoring degraded land, rivers, and wetlands to ensure sustained water quantity and quality, with special attention given to equity and justice. We need to recognize that this will be a transformational journey and one we cannot take on. We just listed some of the partners we collaborated with on the Strategic Water Source Areas project. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Ilse. We'd like to apologize for the sound problems in that presentation, but we're going to move on and have comment by David Lemaitre and also Lindy Smithadale. David has more than 30 years of research experience in the areas of assessing hydrological and ecological impacts of land cover change, as well as in the area of fire ecology. David?
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Michelle. The strategic water source areas are critical infrastructure for South Africa. Our water is limited and precious, but we can protect it by managing the land and the human activity, particularly the strategic water source areas. Active protection of scarce and precious water will require the participation of everyone. So these areas really pose a challenge to us because what we do affects not only the place, but everyone downstream. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We're now going to hear from Lindy. Lindy is also a member of the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Service Group, and she has more than 15 years of experience in fields related to environmental management and biodiversity planning and assessment. Lindy?
Good morning, everyone. One of the projects that's also related to ecological infrastructure is the National Biodiversity Assessment 2018. This project basically had a few key messages. One was that water going into the ocean is not wasted. Healthy ecosystem is crucial for water security. And a big message that came out of that project was that wetlands is very threatened and also one of the least protected ecosystems in the country. So as you can see, there's clearly a link between our ecosystems as well as what we do. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks. I'd like to, at this point, see whether there are any questions from the audience so far around ecological infrastructure. Okay, so we're going to move on and we'll have another chance for questions after our panel, which I'm going to introduce now. So we have 3 external stakeholders who are now going to speak. And the first one is going to be Marlene Larosse. Marlene is an urban sustainability practitioner with 20 years of applied experience in research, advocacy, private consulting, and public sector context. She has been engaged in sustainability policies in South Africa, regionally in Africa, and also globally. Marlene joined the Western Cape government in 2014, where she is director of the Biodiversity and Coastal Management Department. Thank you, Marlene.
Thanks and good morning, colleagues, and everyone who's participating today. It gives me great pleasure a huge honor to participate in this panel discussion. We have been very fortunate over the last 2 years to be working with the team of the CSIR, which has allowed us to advance significantly a framework for ecological infrastructure investment for the Western Cape. It's one of our key and core projects within our directorate, and we are trying to establish the basis for coordinated and prioritized investment into ecological infrastructure in the Western Cape. So many of you know that while we are increasingly successful in making the case for ecological infrastructure nationally, provincially, and even at a local level, we do struggle with the holy grail of having systematized processes, prioritization, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of that investment. And that is part of the huge drive behind what we're trying to do. But perhaps to bring to the fore some of the key challenges in that space specifically revolves around around ecological infrastructure being viewed as essential infrastructure on an even par with grey infrastructure, and to get a place at the table and a slice of the ongoing permanent allocation for infrastructure maintenance. So the tie-up between making the case for ecological infrastructure and actually getting to the point where there is a long-term permanent allocation beyond EPWP programs, I think is still a major issue, but we're seeing that change slowly over time, and that's certainly what we hope to advance through our EIF. I think it's really important just to consider where we are globally as well in this context, and it does help to make the case. But when insurance companies and specifically reinsurance companies globally start to consider biodiversity and ecosystem services and the risks there too, and how they could potentially impact gross domestic product for the globe, we then all start to sit up and take significant notice. And just recently, Swiss Re, in October, they've published a Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services Index. And in the process of doing that, have also put forward some really interesting information, which I think provides great grist to the mill for our further discussion, in which they say that 1/5 of countries worldwide are at risk from ecosystems collapse. And there they highlight South Africa and Australia, the top rankings for fragile biodiversity and ecosystem services, specifically focused on the dimensions of water services, coastal protection, and pollination. Now, if you just look at the Western Cape from our perspective, those 3 areas are critical in terms of our long-term economic resilience. And this really is a further let's say, motivation that we focus and systematize our approaches there too. So ultimately, 55% of global gross domestic product is specifically focused and depends on ecological infrastructure and functioning EI thereof. So for us, in carrying forward these critical informants, and let's say that the space is an incredibly busy space currently, with many proposals, many activities moving forward in the strategic water source areas, some of which CSIR is already involved in, moving forward on adaptation strategies along the coast and within estuaries, looking at accessing global funds, and also, as I've mentioned before, trying to get the permanent allocations for EI remains the significant challenge for us. But where we're finding a great amount of, let's call it, progress is really at the local level. And this is on either on a catchment basis or a sub-catchment basis, where stakeholders are coming together to actually plan in detail for the long-term maintenance of EI. And also therein looking for sustainable funding mechanisms to do that. And then maybe, Michelle, if I can just end off, the way in which public sector finance can leverage private sector finance and investment in EI is a critical matter that we are carrying forward and are working with partners in that space, because slowly and over time we're seeing a significant interest, not just in terms of social responsibility investment, but actually in terms of long-term business continuity for large industry and for business in South Africa, where functioning catchments, functioning EI, and specifically in terms of water security, are becoming a critical focus, where they are aligning themselves to support priorities. And our challenge now is to see how can we use public sector finance to leverage the prioritized and systematic investment in those priority catchments. And as I've started off by saying, we are on the way to doing that through our EIF in the Western Cape, and articulating that with the national frameworks as well. Michelle, I don't want to take up more time from the other panelists, but I'm happy to answer further questions as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marlene. So after we've heard from our next two panelists, we're going to come back for questions. So please keep those questions for Marlene. Next up is Kerry Savin, who is a sustainability manager at Nedbank, specializing in strategy, reporting, and stakeholder engagement. Kerry's responsibilities, in addition to the integration of sustainability into Nedbank's strategy, includes managing the group's relationships with NGOs such as WWF to protect South Africa's most prominent water source areas. Thank you, Kerry.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks, Michelle. Thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit about how Nedbank is using its CSI, our operations and our lending to address ecological infrastructure. I think the benefits of investing in our ecosystems are clear and were certainly well covered in the first presentation and by the first panelist. But as was pointed out towards the end of the last presentation, kind of how to do that with the most impact, particularly using traditional finance, is a little less clear. So as Nedbank, we've been on this journey or sustainable development journey in one way or another for about 30 years. And as we learn more about this complex subject, we try to do better. Key to this learning has been our partnerships with experts in this field, like the WWF and Wild Trust. As we've only got a short time to share this morning, I'm going to just chat through 3 different ways that we're currently investing in ecological infrastructure. So firstly, from an operations perspective, well, obviously as a bank, we're a relatively small water user, staff and some buildings spread across the country. We wanted to minimize the impact of that operational water usage. And we did that predominantly through investment in the WWF Water Balance Program, which removes alien invasives from key water source areas. This 12 million rand investment has resulted in approximately 1 billion litres of water a year remaining in vital water catchments, and that is considerably more than our annual operational water usage. Secondly, on behalf of our clients, we've invested 300 million rand over the last 30 years into the WWF Nedbank Green Trust. So the Green Trust, as many of you will probably know, is one of the largest funders of environmental projects and related research in the country, and something that we're particularly proud to have contributed to through our clients. We're also trying to minimize our negative impact on ecosystems through the use of our social and environmental management system when we consider applications for lending. This system is relevant to the discussion today because it includes a geographic screening tool, which includes water source areas. So it helps us really evaluate the type of lending that we are agreeing to in these precious water source areas. In 2019, we took our partnership with WWF to the next level by entering a 5-year, 25 million rand water source area conservation partnership. The new partnership prioritizes the support of water security, reducing land degradation, and improving local economic opportunities for rural communities in the Eastern Cape, which, as many of you will know, is home to the second largest water source area in South Africa. The hope is that over the period of the partnership, we're going to be able to showcase the value of investing in water source areas and deliver valuable learning and insights that can actually be replicated nationally. Lastly, we understand that as a bank, the only real way to make impact at scale is through the use of our core business and that of lending. And that's really what Marlene was alluding to at the end of her session. We have got some innovative products that allow our clients to borrow money for investment into things like water efficiency technology. And we try our utmost to support particularly our agriculture clients because, as we know, our farmers are certainly the custodians of much of our ecosystems. And then we also lend more traditionally into water bodies like the TCTA and water boards. But lending directly into ecological infrastructure at scale is still a real challenge. There has to be a financial return in addition to the social and environmental return to attract private sector finance. And we believe that these opportunities are going to rely on many things. But really, just to reiterate what Marlene was saying, I think new levels of collaboration between the private, civil and public sectors is going to be absolutely critical. As well as a review of things like water tariffs, and in particular, the water resource management charge and how that's actually used. If we manage to do this innovatively, we think that it's going to result in the ability of new instruments like water bonds and social impact bonds to really be used effectively to increase ecological infrastructure across the country. So from my side, in closing, I came across this quote by Herman Daly, and some of you may have heard it. He's a leader among economists in analyzing sustainable development. And he states that the paths to sustainability are not unknown. Sorry, the paths to sustainability are unknown, not because they're hard to find, but because we actually haven't taken enough time to look. So as leaders in this sector, I think we need to take on his challenge and take the time to look for innovative solutions. But most importantly, we need to be doing it together. So that's it for me, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Kerry. Last on the panel, we have Carla Hudson. Carla is the program manager for the Mine Water Coordinating Body in Johannesburg. She's a mine closure and environmental specialist with extensive experience in environmental impact assessment, mine closure permitting, water management, and stakeholder engagement. Carla is responsible for facilitating regional mine closure for the members of the Mine Water Coordinating Body in the Upper Orange catchment in the Mpumalanga coalfields. Thank you, Carla.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi. Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you for this opportunity. Yes, I represent the most polluted area in South Africa, and we're actually looking at how we can actually fix it. So basically, as the previous two panelists was actually mentioning is the importance of collaboration and working together. And that is exactly what we're trying to do in the Upper Olifants. In 2016, 6 mining companies came together with national government and provincial government to actually look at how we can work together to ensure that the legacy that is left by mining is a good one, and the empowering of communities. So basically, so as Kerry's mentioned, is where does funding come from and how do you actually get private funding? And that's where the collaboration come in, is actually to talk to national and provincial government to find out what is possible from a private sector side, and then what is needed from a national and provincial side. So that is exactly what we're trying to do. It started out as a circular green economy, then we talked about the nexus. So the vocabulary has changed. At the moment, we're talking about a just transition or a just energy transition. And basically all of them is exactly the same, is to improve the environment for the community directly affected, and then for the downstream users. In Mpumalanga, in the Upper Olifants, we actually influence workings in the middle and lower Olifants, as well as transborder into Mozambique, because it goes into the Limpopo catchment. So the Upper Olifants is actually a very, very important catchment to sort out. And the only way we can sort it out is basically with collaboration and involving the community. So in phase 1, basically we established this collaboration platform, which was done very, very successfully. We've got 6 miners, including Eskom, which obviously is a very big player in our area. Then we've got all the national departments on board, including Department of Agriculture, Department of Environmental Affairs, and then we've got a big commitment from the provincial government, Department of Environmental Development and Tourism, and then the municipalities. And that was actually amazing to be the link between the municipalities and province, and then the private sector, and just opening opportunity for the municipalities to actually come to the table and represent their communities and what the communities actually would like, because there's always been a big misunderstanding between private sector, national government, and the communities, what is actually needed in those communities. So we've identified, so we've completed phase 1, which basically was, we looked at the whole region's water. We know exactly where the water is, what the water quality is, and how much water there is. We're looking at opportunities, so we see water as an enabler. And then the fit for purpose use of water to actually uplift the communities and involve the communities. So we're looking at the excess mine water, and then the mine land and Eskom's land, and then the infrastructure, and then repurposing the land, the infrastructure, and the water for socio-economic upliftments projects. So phase 1, we identified 5 areas. So the whole Upper Olifants has been divided into management units. We've identified 5 management units that we're going to focus on, where we're then going to improve the ecological environment, the water quality, and then uplift the communities through that whole process. So we've got partnerships with WWF. We're talking to other industries like Coca-Cola that has similar problems with their tires, with their plastic. So it actually, we realized very quickly, it's not just a mining problem, it's a regional problem. And we have to get all the stakeholders on board and look at and think out the box. And we've actually come across such amazing ways of making the environment part of a value chain, and that people in the community actually realize the ecological services that is so badly needed to actually make sure that we are living in a sustainable world, and making sure that those communities are sustainable. Thanks. I think I'm going to stop there. Otherwise, I can go on for a very long time. But I think that gives you just an idea of what we are trying to do in the Upper Olifants. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carla. I'm going to first ask if there are any questions from the audience at the moment. No question. Okay, so I'd like to ask, in the meantime, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to please speak a little bit more about this relationship between the public and the private sector in investing in ecological infrastructure. So, Marlene, what do you see? I'm going to just ask the three questions, and then if you can speak to them, what do you see from a sort of government point of view as the main challenges in getting that partnership going? And then Kerry, and if you can speak to a little bit more detail about what, from a private sector point of view, particularly a bank, you have said that it's difficult to invest in ecological infrastructure because financial returns need to be shown. What is the way around that? Or is it that we need to be able to monetize what the financial returns are? What are some of the challenges around that? And Carla, you have been working both with the private and public sector together in the coordinating body. What do you see as some of the success factors for good working together of the private and the public sector? So I think I will start with me.
Thanks, Michelle. You know, I think that the challenge in terms of staying in partnership with the private sector and even the NGO sector relate back to budget issues and capacity issues within the public sector. But I think principally, if you're asking about how does one use funds, how does one allocate funds, and how does one manage funds arising from private sector investment, I think that is a challenge, and there are different vehicles that have been established. Working with local government and even some large landowners, the issue of the water resource charge and bulk water tariffs always are raised as the reason why local government is less inclined to invest in ecological infrastructure. City of Cape Town, for example, with its specific levy and tariff for water, other municipalities have not opted to increase tariffs in order to necessarily fund EI on the basis of the fact that the water resource charges and other such tariffs are deemed not to be properly allocated, or are yet to be properly allocated within certain priority catchments. So that is the sort of, if you think about the backdrop for the public sector and the municipal space, how do we then move forward in a way to bring and partner with the private sector? And we have understood over this time that the private sector is not that interested in putting funding into government. Okay, we have had, of course, the COVID fund, specific fund, which is a different story. But in terms of a long-term investment, social responsibility investment, or even other kinds of investments, it's not necessarily deemed as a place to go to provide funding directly into government. So then one asks the question, what vehicles do you need? And are those then, do we start to see those as almost parallel governance mechanisms to what already exists in terms of catchment management authorities, water users associations, and other legislative mechanisms for allocating resources? But it's clear that alternative vehicles, parallel vehicles, are probably going to be needed when it comes to private sector interests. And perhaps our colleague from Nedbank can speak further to that. I don't think that there's enough confidence in how that funding can be ring-fenced and allocated to very specific areas. And hence we see the uptake or the movement forward of initiatives like the Greater Cape Town Water Fund, okay, which is a space within which private sector can invest in a very specific and targeted vehicle, and it stands in partnership with government, but not transferred to government coffers. So I think that the critical challenge there is making the case in the context of existing tariff and charge systems, which are not appropriately hitting the ground. And then also to ask, or to move forward is what are the vehicles through which the private sector would be willing to participate in order that their investment hits the ground. Now, interestingly enough, just was it day before yesterday, we participated in the survey final research workshop in which actual return on investment for the private sector is a specific question that they're trying to answer. So the broad social and economic benefits are clear, but the return on investment in terms of the period of return, generally in this particular context, it's going to be over a longer period. And the rate of return would be less than potentially what is usually anticipated in the private sector. But then again, this as a specific asset class is an area which still needs to be chased and investigated, I think, with our private sector and specific banking colleagues in the construction and development of bonds in this space. And therein, I think, lies an innovative set of municipal financing mechanisms and other financing mechanisms, which I think really are the cutting edge of how we move forward in leveraging private sector investment. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks very much, Marlene. Kerry, if you could speak to that same issue.
Sure. I mean, I think that Marlene has answered it fairly thoroughly on our behalf, and thanks for that, Marlene. I do think that it's going to require what we like to refer to as a blended finance solution, which really does look at bringing in a range of different financiers that have different rates of return and expectation. So we talk private sector quite broadly, and obviously there would be, a set of stakeholders that would require a higher rate of return, but there are certainly more and more, particularly from an international perspective and a DFI perspective, investors that are really interested in the social and ecological return and are prepared to take longer tenors and reduced rates to see those environmental and social benefits realized. We haven't cracked that in terms of a pilot in South Africa yet, but I do think we're getting quite close to being able to do that with some of the water boards starting to think a little bit more innovatively and looking to at least provide some kind of investment as a type of first loss guarantee. I think that there's also a lot of opportunity for there to be more collaboration. I mean, you can imagine the Working for Water program. If we can get them working in the same areas covering the labor costs as a water board that's able to allocate their water resource management tariffs appropriately, and if those could be ring fenced, and Marlene does speak to the fact that that is not guaranteed at this stage, and to be honest, at the moment, that rate is not high enough to guarantee the type of return that we need. But I think that there's the right kind of discussions that are happening. I think also importantly, another opportunity for private sector to get involved is really around the investing in the biomass value chain. I think there's lots of jobs that can be created through that, and a lot more focus required on kind of guaranteeing that market. And I'm quite pleased to see a couple of proposals coming across my desk, not necessarily from a purely commercial perspective, but looking more for patient capital. But again, seeing DFI participation, seeing some private sector participation, and then seeing some commercial money coming into it as well. So I think there's lots of really good reasons to be investing, and Carla, when you look at the challenges that you've got from a just transition perspective, I think investment in ecosystem infrastructure really does give us the opportunity to create some of the jobs that would be potentially lost in the energy transformation. I think maybe then just to, as a last comment, people say to us, it's very strange for banks to be investing in this area, and perhaps less so now, but when we first started investing, a lot of people thought it was absolutely crazy. But for us, whilst a lot of that is our sort of CSI, we never talk about it as a donation. We talk about it as an investment, because we really do believe that by investing in those water source areas, we are reducing the risk and ensuring, water availability for all of our clients, be they individuals or be they businesses. And I think that that's really important. And there's a lot of opportunity for other private sector players to be looking at the very least as to how they can invest in these water source areas and actually redefine their CSI type spend, and actually putting it into something like this that actually gives them a return in terms of reduced risk in particular.
Thank you, Kerry. I'm going to move over to Carla. Some of the success factors around the public and private sector working together, and maybe if there are also challenges you'd like to mention, please feel free.
Well, the big success that we've actually had is the breakdown of barriers between the private sector, the public sector, and then civil society, and actually just building up that trust of, because it's always the private sector is always feeling that national government is sort of a stick, that you have to comply. And I think there's an understanding now that what is possible from a private sector, especially from a mine closure perspective, what is possible. We're sitting with a 150-year legacy. Sometimes it's just impossible to rehabilitate a piece of land as a mine on its own. It's just so the whole understanding of what is possible, what should happen, the longer vision, and then of course the SDGs is becoming very important, and it actually makes it very easy, because now everybody has got the same vision. It's well defined, so we actually write all our projects to tick all the SDGs, which actually fits in very nice with all the CSI funding. Then we've broken the barriers down within companies, because companies has got, especially mines, has got an environmental department and a social department and a CSI department, and all that funding seems to always stand alone. And what we've actually done is we break down those barriers and actually develop the project so that it ticks all the boxes, because it's not you just rehabilitate land to tick the box of closure. Actually rehabilitate the land so that you can get the community involved and the long-term CSI. So that helped a lot, because then suddenly you're working with big money. And then also, because we've broken the barriers down between mining companies, the neighboring mines, you can actually work on projects that has got economy of scale. So instead of having 10 hectares, you now suddenly can actually have a project that can produce 50,000 tons of maize, and you can actually partner with the farmers that is around. So we've had quite a bit of international interest. I have to say South Africa is in the forefront of this. We've got a project that has been very, very successfully run. Irrigation with mine water. Obviously, it has to be suitable mine water. Not all mine water is suitable for irrigation for human consumption or animal consumption. But that project has been phenomenally successful, and nature has just shown once again how amazing the engine of rehabilitation in nature. If you actually leave nature to do its thing, it does its thing beautifully. So we're actually looking at partnering with international companies to produce maize in that area, and South African breweries is interested, because everybody has realized that they have to look at upliftment of communities, and they have to use rehabilitated land and then a fit for purpose water. And I think the big realization that also came is there's no such thing as wastewater. Water in whatever sense is a resource, and that was quite a big mind shift to go through, because if water is not suitable for agricultural use, for human consumption, you can always look at fiber crops or industrial use. So we've learned really a lot of lessons together, and I think it's very, very positive. And then Kerry's point of blended funding. It is actually amazing when somebody is prepared to pay something, how you actually can get other parties as well. We're working on one project now, which suddenly we've got 6 interested parties that is prepared to give us finance. So I think if we can just think of it as a whole project, and not think in our little silos and our little boxes, I think we can achieve quite a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carla. We've got one question from our audience. This person says that it's very encouraging that these kinds of discussions and collaborations are taking place. Are we managing to mainstream the issue? So I guess this speaks to, we have pockets, and certainly we have CSI investment, but to what extent are we mainstreaming the issue? To what extent is it becoming sort of the primary concern or the primary investment? My sense is there's a long way to go there, but I'm going to ask the 3 of you to give a short comment on that. Please raise your hand if you feel ready to comment on that. Marlene?
I'll go first. Thanks, Michelle. I think that's a really important issue, and it goes to the mainstreaming into infrastructure, EI being seen as a subsector of infrastructure, just as important as grey infrastructure. We've always said, you know, water doesn't come from a pipe or a dam, it comes from the catchment. And that is infrastructure which we seldom, or let's say we haven't really factored in necessarily into the thinking around maintenance of infrastructure, although the recent, the project under the GEF financing 6 process is specifically looking at that, how you link EI to built infrastructure. So that's an element of looking at different kinds of accounting, as well as looking at how you build that into the financing of large-scale infrastructure. So there are initiatives to try to do that. As I've mentioned, just the basic acceptance of this as a subsector of infrastructure is quite critical in that space. And then, you know, the mainstreaming of this is pretty much how we make each and every decision. How we make a decision around looking after how we design culverts, for example, to allow a river or water to pass, or a wetland to pass under a road, needs now fundamentally to consider how can that best contribute to the long-term maintenance of EI? How can it be cost effective in that space? A lot of our EI, and if you just look at the municipal level, public open space, the real investment, or much of the spending going into public open space, is actually from areas of infrastructure development, stormwater, etc. And it's how you mainstream or bring that funding online to address your objectives, rather than creating an initiative de novo. And then I think, just jumping into the biomass issue, is that if a specific value chain makes sense in conventional economics, it will work to provide the incentive to invest in ecological infrastructure. And I think that you know, organizations like Nedbank and others are well on their way to trying to see how that can be mainstreamed into investment decisions, as well as in loan decisions. And in fact, critically, I think that's also what the GEF 6 project is around, in terms of looking at fiscal policy, investment policies, and loan approaches to providing loan finance for any kind of infrastructure. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks very much, Marlene. Kerry or Carla, would you like to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Yeah, so I think even in my little intro, I referenced just how important it is to get to scale, and the only way you get through to scale is by ensuring you use core business. As an example, from a Nedbank perspective, we spend about 150 million Rand on CSI each year. Our operations cost about 50 billion each year, and we probably do in a region of about 180 billion rands worth of advances and loans. So you can understand that if we're wanting to get to scale in addressing the sustainable development agenda, it must be through our core lending. And of course, that doesn't mean that the answers are easy, otherwise we'd all be doing it already. But a deliberate focus on using one's core business to find the solutions to address these challenges is absolutely imperative. I think what's also key in terms of trying to mainstream this agenda is really tackling one's worldview. And that's quite difficult when you've had, you know, a worldview that says that we don't value anything that nature gives us for free, and we do not see ourselves as part of the system. We see the system there as to serve our economic needs. And so there's a lot of work that we've been trying to do with being taught by our partners, and then working with our clients, being taught by our clients, and working with our internal teams to really try and turn that worldview on its head and help people understand that we are part of a system, and a nested and very interdependent system. And that will require us to think about things differently. We, a little bit tongue-in-cheek now, tease some of our colleagues and we say, guys, when reality and the spreadsheets start to diverge, one must focus and follow reality. One must not keep one's eyes on the spreadsheet. And that's quite difficult for an organization that is made up of a lot of accountants and actuaries. But that change in worldview is going to be extremely important, we believe, in terms of mainstreaming things and delivering change at scale.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Kerry. Carla, do you have a comment on this issue?
No, I just totally agree with Marlene and Kerry. I think that, yeah, that is what I would have said.
Thank you, Carla. We're going to wrap up, and I'm going to give each of you, as well as David Lemaitre, just 30 seconds for final comments on whatever you would like to say. David is focused on strategic water source areas, and as Kerry says, we need more investment in their management. So if you could just 30 seconds, maybe tell us what some of the challenges or benefits around managing them are.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I see one of the key challenges is in my field as a scientist, and that is better understanding how climate change will affect water availability. So, for example, a lot of the water that you guys experience is coming off our high altitude grasslands. Rising temperatures could increase the growing season. The grasses no longer they use water, there's less water in the rivers, and we don't understand those dynamics very well. Also about making restoration more effective. We need to invest a lot more in understanding what works and doesn't work in restoration. Then I think Kerry said it very well on investments, but we need to also think about how do we account for the fact that these investments we make have values and benefits in perpetuity. It's not that in 30 years' time they'll become worth nothing or the water will become worth nothing. They're actually real assets and probably actually increase in value with time. And then Carl has also spoken about breaking down the barriers in business. We need to break down the barriers in government. We need to recognize that, for example, at a municipal, that water management involves planning, involves stormwater, it involves wastewater, it involves water supply. All of those departments and probably others need to work together to actually manage and protect the water in our cities and in our landscapes.
Thank you very much, David. So we've actually run out of time, so my apologies. This has been really, really interesting, and I'd like to thank our panelists and the CSIR researchers for a really interesting discussion, and we look forward to taking this conversation further. Thank you.